What's up, meta nerds? This video will be a complete breakdown of one of the strangest, complex, and horrifying species in the galaxy, the Sarlacc, looking into its biology, semi-sentience, and connection to consciousness and perhaps the Force, as well as its impact on the galaxy and individuals that had run-ins with this hidden terror. This creature has a lot of psychologically symbolic features, the torturous elements that lie just below the surface, that if you fall into, you'll be slowly tortured in isolation. That's why I want to thank this video's sponsor, BetterHelp. In 2022, I'm going to set my first mental health goals. I've been good about career, skills, workout, money, goals like that, but I've never actually set mental health goals. But I think it's time that I finally put an end to the self-destructive thoughts and behavior that have plagued me for too long. Like a lot of you out there, I've never sought professional help because of just how hard it is to find somebody, how expensive it can be, and just the overall inconvenience. BetterHelp solves all three of these issues and has 20,000 licensed therapists worldwide. Now, this isn't a crisis line. If you need immediate help, use that number instead, but this also isn't your superficial, fluffy self-help kind of stuff. It is professional therapy done securely and affordably via your phone or PC. You fill out a short questionnaire about the type of help you might need, anything from relationship advice to depression, anxiety, or just setting goals, and you add a personalized message about yourself with further details. You'll be paired up with a therapist that specializes in your personal issues, all within 48 hours, and you meet with them on your time via phone or video chats or even just messages. Whichever you prefer, and you can always send messages in whenever. Getting therapy should be as seamless and stress-free as possible, and that's why I love this method. No sitting in traffic or awkward waiting rooms. It's much more flexible and something you can stick to, and there's also financial aid available. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. Visit betterhelp.com/metanerds, that's betterhelp.com/metanerds, and join the over 2 million people worldwide taking charge of their health with licensed therapists. You deserve to prioritize your mental health this year. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/metanerds. Seriously, one of the worries since making this channel is that people use this kind of fictional distraction to get away from their real life issues as a way to avoid bettering themselves, and if you worry about that too, please just check out the link in the description. We'll start at the beginning. Sarlacc conception. It's fascinating, but not to be viewed up close. These large, devouring ones we see are the females, while the males are much smaller and roam an environment looking for a female to parasitically feed off of. It will attach to her and siphon off nutrients, and she will physically wither during this process. The original male will absorb the body of the female, to the point that she is considered devoured, but the spore production sac is retained intact. So really it is now a combined male-female creature, and releases its sperm equivalent into the equivalent of eggs absorbed by the female, as this melded couple being would now dedicate all effort to fertilizing these spores. The sac is growing in size and building up an incredible pressure, and keep in mind this entire process takes thousands of years from boy meets girl to parasitically feeding, and then the birth of the next generation, which is a dramatic and grotesque explosion that marks the death of this merged being in a bloody Sarlacc geyser, which shoots up out of the ground, projecting its fertilized spores miles up into the atmosphere, with enough power to actually escape most planets. The best Coruscanti biologists agree that the Sarlacc is one of the most ancient species in the galaxy, and because its spores can survive in space for thousands of years, there is little hope that its original homeworld will ever be identified. And numerous cultures have mythological stories revolving around these creatures, the most notable being the Tusken Raiders, who swore that the Sarlacc was a self-created god that gave birth to itself in the core of Tatooine, long before their sun split in two. The end of the world would come about when the Sarlacc devoured all of Tatooine, and the beast would be forced to devour itself, presumably marking the end of all existence. When these spores, called Sarlacci, came into contact with any source of plant or animal life, it would start to devour it like a leech or tick, eventually growing in size to reach its larval stage. Now it could travel around its environment to hunt new prey, with its tentacle-like appendages pulling things into its layers of teeth and mouths. Growing larger, they reached this adolescent period about half the size of a human, and they would furiously hunt down their prey with blistering speed, and now fully formed tongue and mouth that would operate much like its final form. But in this proactive hunting phase, they would swarm on anything that came in their path. Between the spore and adolescent phase, nearly all of them would die, as all cultures and even animals knew that when they met a Sarlacc pack, they had to attempt to eradicate it immediately. You could imagine that even at times of war, there must have been things like ceasefires to deal with the greater threat of roaming Sarlaccs. Civilizations taking a break before they got back to fighting each other. but the ones that did survive enter into a sort of teenager, young adult phase. And one of the first signs of a deeper intelligence is that it would start to challenge much larger prey in hopes of being swallowed whole. This was a much easier way to capture calories, as they would devour the host from the inside out, until the creature died, and then that corpse was still dined on for weeks, until not even the bones remained. Again, this whole phase lasted thousands of years, and after countless banthas, dewbacks, rancors, or whatever else it came across, roughly 30,000 years of being an organic black hole, it would finally settle down and enter its mature plant-like phase. Like a massive oak, fungus, and Venus flytrap all in one, it would use its beak-like tongue to burrow 100 meters under the surface. Remember, it really could be in almost any environment if we see one thriving on Tatooine. And on jungle worlds, you could imagine they had much more calories, and would grow even larger or at least support many more Sarlaccs. The tentacles would grow out in each direction to act like roots, as they could absorb nutrients through the skin. This meant that even if large prey didn't approach the mouth, anything that died within this enormous circle of nutrient collection could still feed the Sarlacc. This thing lives on scales of thousands of years, so all the little bugs, rodents, microbes, and big game that died and dissolved would provide that little bit of sustenance as it worked its way into the sands or soil. These terrors are so large that most cultures knew to avoid entire areas around a buried Sarlacc, and all the animals also knew these areas were off limits. So the Sarlacc victims were usually the young of these animals that got separated from the pack, or visitors from other worlds that did not know the area. The tendrils around the mouth would emit pheromones and odors that lured in many types of species, being able to mimic thousands of plants and animal smells, so that the ignorant or desperate come close enough to be snatched up. If it tried to escape, it would be impaled by the thousands of razor-sharp, meter-long teeth, as this fleshy mouth would undulate to ensure the target was pierced and killed. Then the tendrils could use the teeth to rip larger prey like banthas up into smaller chunks, but because this creature lived so long and prey tried so hard to avoid it, could go extremely long between meals. In part due to those roots picking up nutrients, but also because when it did swallow its prey whole, it purposely kept it alive in its stomach to be digested on for eons.
In his belly you will find a new definition of pain and suffering, as you are slowly digested over 1,000 years.
Once you make it past the hardened beak-like exterior of the main tongue, you pass through a 3-meter wide mouth, and beyond that a sand trap that would keep soils from passing into the stomachs. Right before the digestion begins, you pass through a jungle of stinging tentacles that inject a neurotoxin that paralyzes the victim and makes for easier transport to the proper stomach. Boba likely recovered from the neurotoxin because of his suit and his experience from a life as a bounty hunter, as he once survived falling into a patch of poisonous Zabar fungus in his youth, faking his death when attacked by General Grievous, who was certain that Boba must be dead if he was caught up in these toxins. So some combination of his resolve, genetics, and technology in the suit helps him to regain control of his body in the Sarlacc. Just past these toxic tendrils, we see the first sign of one of the strangest aspects of this creature, making it one of the most interesting in the galaxy. Sarlacc biology may hold the key to understanding the connection between our physical bodies and metaphysical aspects like consciousness, as it is somehow able to keep personal identities alive and thinking, even though the original host body was dissolved into the Sarlacc flesh. In fact, it can detect the intelligence of the victim as it passes this area. If it's a mindless animal, it will be dropped down into the main stomach, still devoured over centuries and lined with countless meat cubbies to maintain the slowly dissolving prey. But these two side stomachs were used for intelligent prey, those with something we might call a soul. Coruscant biologists haven't the slightest clue how this works, but many spiritual groups like the Jedi suspect that it must be some sort of Force sensitivity. If the Force enables one to retain their consciousness after death, it must be related to consciousness itself. And since we know of some creatures like the Ysalmiri, Voxen, and Lothwolf use their Force connection for various purposes, it is reasonable to conclude that this ancient creature could also be in tune somehow. But stranger yet is that once the body is dissolved, the consciousness is trapped in the flesh of the Sarlacc, joining a sort of hive mind or server with digital avatars trapped in a dreamlike state, with glimpses of their past life breaking through to their awareness of this bloody red flesh walls of hell. Boba's survival made him an unexpected hero to xenobiologists everywhere, as legends have it that when a scientist got hold of a holo recorder from Boba's helmet, he discovered a new disturbing aspect to the Sarlacc. By using its connection to the consciousness of its victims, it would also use a sort of telepathic torture, causing nightmare-like visions as Boba was reacting to and fighting things that were not actually on the recording. If he had stayed too long, he too would have been swallowed up into the consciousness, and specifically this one on Tatooine had swallowed several Jedi over its 30,000 plus year lifespan. For some reference, that's older than the Old Republic and Sith Empire, older even than the Prime Jedi and Jedi Order, and over this nearly entire recorded galactic history, it swallowed at least 2 Jedi, one by the name of Suzeho and the other one lost to time. Suzeho was digested for several thousand years, and his consciousness was in this constant torture and communion with his captor. While his final body faded into the cells of the Sarlacc, so too did his mind. His mind was embodied in this very hell that swallowed him, and he would communicate with the victims over millennia, learning of galactic affairs from the other Jedi and travelers like wayward settlers and hunters. Legends say Boba would have lengthy conversations with this voice in his head, which at this point swore to Fett that it was the Sarlacc itself. Eventually, Boba got it to understand that Suzeho was losing his memories of his real life before the Sarlacc, and kept pushing and insulting him in order to trick the being into using its tentacles to crush Boba's jetpack, causing an explosion that allowed him to escape in Legends. Biologists believe that this absorption of minds from various different sentient beings allowed it to create a hive intelligence that helped the Sarlacc to attract more prey. But with Boba's helmet recordings, other scientists posited a darker conclusion that this was just to appeal to a sadistic side of the semi-sentient creature, that in this unfathomably long and boring life as an eating pit, the Sarlacc was intelligent enough to want to play with its food, much like some monkeys or dolphins, and mentally and physically torturing its victims seemed to be the highest level of interaction that it could come up with. Or at least this one on Tatooine. Perhaps other Sarlacc's used their intelligences differently. And this is just kind of crazy speculation of my own, but if it does have these weird sort of telepathic powers, who knows what role it could have played when Jabba was carrying out his execution. As we know, many Force wielders do not believe in coincidences, and Han getting that lucky hit on Boba was a hell of a coinkydink. Crazy for sure, but something fun to think about. There were a few other people that did escape this fate, like Zorba the Hutt, who claimed the monster threw him up because even Sarlacc knew they couldn't digest a hardy Hutt. Though no one believed this, but they also couldn't provide an alternative. One 15-year-old daughter of moisture farmers was running from stormtroopers when she stumbled into the pit, only to have the stormtroopers devoured, while she was thrown back out to the sand. And then there was Starkiller's battle with Shaak Ti on Felucia. She was with the Felucian locals, who had a religious reverence for the Sarlacc, calling it the Ancient Abyss, and using it for ritual sacrifices since time immemorial. The battle would take them into the mouth, where the Jedi would be able to use the Force to take control of the tentacles, which almost swallowed up Vader's apprentice, but his resolve and powers in the dark side forced Shaak Ti to give up the fight and fall into the mouth, where she appears to have become one with the Force. And speaking of these Jedi, the oldest lightsaber form, Form 1, which was the first one taught to all members of the Jedi Order, was called Shi-Cho, or the Way of the Sarlacc. This must mean that the Jedi Order was well aware of the Sarlacc even in its earliest times. Oh, it is an odd creature to name your saber combat after. This tradition was so old that the Jedi themselves lost records on who named it this or why, and the closest explanation may have something to do with this being taught alongside philosophies of incapacitating your opponent without killing them. In a way, the Sarlacc too just disables you and technically doesn't kill you, at least not for a while. A few more things to look at in this cross-section is the multiple hearts that are paired with multiple lungs, which keep blood flowing throughout the miles of veins and arteries, which actually grew like roots into the victims, and also moved digestive enzymes, meaning the prey was being digested from the outside in and inside out, presumed to have created a constant boiling and burning sensation. Some of these would grow out to act more like roots, collecting moisture from the soil, and even the great tendrils towards the base are called the anchored root system, pointing at the debate on whether this should be considered an animal or plant or something unique in between. And all of the main body was covered in a thick layer of plate-like armor coating. In its environment, many would develop a symbiotic relationship with the birds or small creatures like the Urusai, which clean its teeth and tentacles. Some animals like the Anuba would use the Sarlacc as a hunting aid, herding their prey towards the pit, where the prey would choose to risk charging into the Anuba pack instead of trying its luck with certain and worse death than the Sarlacc. Its only known predator was to be a fully grown krayt dragon, as nothing else really is this large and mobile. Jabba was advised to destroy the Sarlacc in the Great Pit of Carkoon several times, but it was one of his most prized collections, definitely his most fear-inducing pet. Rancor shows are great and could be done on short notice, but you could make a real memorable party out of a Sarlacc execution. And then there were some scientists that kept alive dream uses of this creature. There was the hope that you could study ancient versions of species that were still being kept alive in their stomachs. But the Holy Grail was to find how the preservation enzymes in the stomach kept flesh alive for thousands of years. It's ironic to think that Boba would have to maintain intense Bacta treatments for the wounds inflicted by the Sarlacc, but in the future, the next miracle healing fluid that might finally replace the blue juice may come from this horrific creature, rescuing the Holy Grail of immortality from the depths of hell itself. They also determined that it shared a common ancestor with the Rathar, Blixus, and Vixus, all ancient and able to thrive in space, as well as nearly any world they found themselves on. So that's it for the breakdown, but you definitely want to hear these cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. There was a mini Sarlacc bred through unknown means that was sold on Coruscant during the Clone Wars, with one named Phileas being sold by a droid in the Jedi Temple. Though it is funny to wonder if it wasn't a mini Sarlacc at all, and was kinda like when somebody lies about the breed of the puppy, and the owner gets shocked to see how big it is. Since the infant stage of the Sarlacc is so long, maybe it could stay this cute little size for your entire lifetime. On Tatooine, there were at least 4 massive Sarlaccs, and the author of the story with the Jedi Suzeo says that the name is "Oh Jesus" backwards. Not sure of the symbolism there, but the character was created because he wanted to make the Sarlacc intelligent, but Lucasfilm vetoed that, and so the alternative was to make him semi-sentient who absorbs intelligences. The sounds of the Sarlacc were created from alligator hissing sounds, mixed with the sounds from the stomachs of the Return of the Jedi crew after they ate a bunch of pizza. Yes, that's true. The beak and extra tentacles were added in the re-release because Lucas said the original never seemed alive to him. The male attaching to the female to mate was based on the anglerfish, and nothing says this explicitly, but many believe that it was based on the sandworm from Dune, and we find the Sarlacc is in the Dune Sea. And Lucas acknowledges inspiration from the novel, which also had large desert vehicles called sandcrawlers, and the drug Spice. Sarlacc has appeared in a ton of games like Super Star Wars and Force Unleashed, and expanded upon in books like The Essential Guide to Alien Species, Atlas, and Ultimate Star Wars. And there's a bit of lore that is confusing, but too potentially cool to not mention. It's said that in rare cases where the Sarlacc's stomach was too filled with food, it wouldn't throw up the excess. Instead, it seems to be saying that it would be able to integrate the beings and direct food into them, augmenting its own stomach with the numerous smaller stomachs of its prey. And Han and Chewie were once on a mission to go into a Sarlacc's stomach to collect a chemical that could be used to make an explosive. So that's it for the Sarlacc. If you like this video, the best way to help me out is to just hit that like button, leave a comment down below, or share this video. Be sure to subscribe if you want to see more, and check out the description for discount links on amazing Star Wars metal print art and free audiobooks from Audible. You'll also see our Patreon and PayPal, and special shout out to our supporters over on Patreon, especially our $25 tier supporters, Bill Payne, Brandon Robinson, and Oscar Jones. But most important of all, remember, no matter how long you've been stuck there, never mistake yourself for the hell you find yourself in, and the Force will be with you, always.